Okay, and I'm back. Welcome to the archives. So this is the second part of the video I just did on Candace Owen versus 20 feminists. So I just thought that it wasn't comprehensive enough for me, right? They didn't define feminists, they didn't define matriarchy. They were talking over each other a lot. They couldn't get it a lot in. And it wasn't honest about exactly why women got into workforce. Now I want to talk about the sexual revolution itself, because Candace Owen was focused primarily on the sexual revolution, right? It's apparently like the worst thing in the world. It's turned women into, all of us, into hoes. We're all apparently shaking our tits and we've all devalued ourselves. Okay. Right? Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but it has to be a little bit more comprehensive and more fact-based rather than just like opinions. And I felt like it was a lot of opinions, and yes, there were some facts, but so what is a sexual revolution, right? I asked Gemini AI, when was the sexual revolution? What was it? And I asked, what was the effects on society? So that's what I want to talk about in this episode, is more about the sexual revolution itself, right? So according to Gemini AI, the sexual revolution was a transformative social movement that began in the mid-20th century, challenging traditional codes of behavior related to sexuality and relationships. It was a period of liberation that fundamentally reshaped norms and attitudes, leading to a more open and permissive culture around sex. So the timeline and the context. While its exact dates are debated, the sexual revolution is generally considered to have taken place from the 1960s to the 1980s. Pay attention to these dates, right? Because there's a lot of other revolutions going on too. The Black Panther, Black movement, queer, I think they get into it, feminists. So around this time, there's a lot of activity, not just within the sexual revolution. It was a multifaceted movement influenced by several factors. Okay, there were several factors that led to the sexual revolution as we know it in the West. The invention of birth control pill, which was in the 1960s. The widespread availability of the contraceptive pill gave women unprecedented control over their reproductive health, effectively separating sex from reproduction. This was arguably the most significant technological driver of the revolution, empowering individuals to make independent choices about their bodies. Let me show you something, 1 second, okay, I wanted to grab something because I love learning. So I just picked this up from the library a couple days ago. It's called Warriors, Queens, and Intellectuals, 36 Great Women between before 1400s. Okay, so I've only watched the first one, which was talking about Julius Caesar, Julian Caesar's daughter. So the first episode was talking about the Roman Empire, or the Roman world, and it talked about what some of the birth control methods were at that time. Infanticide, so they would kill children before the age of 1. Midwives would cut the umbilical cord too closely to stop the infants from breathing. Women would wear amulets made from the head of a spider. Could you imagine wearing the head of a spider as an amulet as a form of birth control? But this is what people did during the Roman Empire. And I'm sharing this because I just talked about the invention of birth control in the 1960s. So before that, way in pre-modern society, people were still using birth control, but this is what it looked like, right? A woman would wear the liver of a cat on her left ankle during intercourse as a form of birth control. Could you imagine? Imagine me wearing Aria or a year's liver on my left ankle. Why the left ankle? During intercourse. This was considered birth control. They also use the rhythm method where you track your cycle, but the thing is they didn't know when women were fertile. They thought that women were fertile after their period, not in the center of their cycle. And then some of them would use, to block the opening of the uterus, they would use soft wool dipped in honey or other ointments. And this was similar to like the modern diaphragm. So they would get soft wool, dip it in honey, and insert it to cover the opening of the uterus. Men would use bladder of a goat as a condom. So they would use the bladder of a goat as a condom, right? And then they would use other herbs to induce miscarriage. So I share this because I just a couple days ago, I learned this information about what birth control methods look like during the Roman Empire, right? So cut to 1960, we've come up with birth control. So obviously that's going to help push the sexual revolution, right? Women can have more sex now without thinking about having children. The hippies counterculture is another part. The free love ethos of the 1960s counterculture promoted sexual freedom as a form of social and political rebellion against the conservative norms of the previous generation. The feminist movement is also mentioned. Second wave feminism challenged patriarchal structures that limited women's role to wives and mothers. Feminists advocated for sexual freedom and bodily autonomy as essential components of women's liberation, right? Your body, your choice. Activism, the rise of the LGBTQ plus activism, particularly after the Stonewall riots in 1969, contributed to a broader push for sexual liberation and acceptance of diverse identities. That's actually, I think, more what Candace is trying to get to. But she couldn't say it outright because she didn't want to look like a homophobe. I could be wrong. But this is actually the issue, right? Promiscuity. I saw recently on CBC, I think it was a Current, they're talking about the book ban in Alberta that was paused, and the advocate that was pushing for the book ban was like, children being exposed to sexual content early makes them more likely to do like deviant stuff. And I'm just like, first of all, what deviant behavior are you talking about? What nobody says, what are you actually talking about? What deviant behavior sexual behavior are you talking about? Name what it is that you're talking about. What are you talking about? Anal sex? Intercourse? Fellatio? Cunnilingus? What are you talking about? I'm a sexual health educator, so I just need to be clear. I don't know what you're talking about when you say deviant or whatever behavior. But this is usually what it is. The sexual revolution is not just feminist. It's actually an attack on the LGBT community. She just couldn't say that part out loud. So the impacts of the sexual revolution on modern ways of living, it says the first one is open dialogue and education, right? That's a way. I don't think Candace talked about that. The sexual revolution, and that many of the, some of them brought this up. It allowed us to have open dialogue. Not everything was hush-hush anymore. We can actually learn about sex. People can actually teach about periods. Even still, I never got sexual health education at home. No one taught me about periods. I never learned about periods at home. I learned about it in family life. I was in Catholic school. In Catholic school, we had family life back in the days. That's where I learned about the menstrual cycle. Actually, that's not true. My mom got me books, right? But I never told her when I had my first period. And I would sneak and hide her pads and take her pads. Hi. I would take her pads and use them, right? But then I would not throw the pads out at home because I was afraid my mom would find out that I was having my period. So even after the sexual revolution, kids like us that were growing up in the 80s and 90s still didn't really talk about sex. They make it sound like it's this rampant thing. I'm a sexual health educator. I never got that, right? But it allowed us to have open dialogue. So the revolution broke down many of the taboos surrounding sex, leading to more open discussions about sexuality in media, education within families. This has contributed to greater awareness of sexual health, consent, and safer sex practices. I don't like using safe because nothing is actually pretty safe, but you can do safer sex practices, right? It redefined relationships. The emphasis on freedom and choice has led to a diversification of relationship models. While traditional marriage remains common, and that's her thing, she's a champion for tradition. I am not. Although I can be very traditional at the same time. It confuses people. Because I can be very traditional, but I'm actually not an advocate for traditional lifestyles. But anyways, society is now more accepting of cohabitation, unmarried partnerships, and non-monogamous relationships. So that is an effect of the sexual revolution. Another one is gender roles. By challenging the notion, and people did bring this up, by challenging the notion that a woman's value is tied to her reproductive and domestic roles, the revolution helped advance gender equality. It allowed women to pursue education and careers with greater freedom and agency. Evolving social norms. So modern attitudes toward premarital sex, same-sex relationships, and diverse gender identities are far more progressive than they were before the 1960s. The revolution laid the groundwork for the ongoing fight for LGBTQ plus rights and gender expression. I think that's what a lot of Christians actually have an issue with, right? It's not that people are talking about sex. It's like they're talking about queer sex, right? Gay sex, lesbian sex, porn. Everybody's talking about porn, but like no one's defining porn. And things that are not porn, they're categorizing as porn. That's not. I don't think you're actually talking about porn. And then there's softcore, hardcore porn. Like, which porn are you talking about? And then body positivity. While not a direct result, the sexual revolution's focus on personal liberation and bodily autonomy has influenced modern movements that champion body positivity and sex and self-acceptance, encouraging people to embrace their bodies outside of idealized standards. So in essence, the sexual revolution fundamentally changed the conversation around sex, moving it from a topic of shame and secrecy to one of personal freedom and open expression. I'm big on shame work, right? So that's a huge thing for me. So that is kind of a background of what, when Candace Owen talks about and others talk about the sexual revolution, here's a little bit more context in terms of the timeline and what it actually, how it affected society, right? When she says the sexual revolution and women not marrying is causing them to have drink and alcohol and addiction, girl, before schizophrenia was even seen as a black thing, it was women, it was housewives. What are you talking about? This is where they're not honest. Candace says feminists are not honest, but she's also not honest. And at least somebody like me can accept when I'm not being honest. But they cannot accept when they're not being honest. You're not being honest. Women were not happy even before then as housewives. We know that because if you go look at the statistics for American Psychology Association Psychiatry, it was the housewives they were targeting. These women were not happy. They were drinking. Homegirls were at home getting drunk. They were losing their minds. And psychiatrists called it hysteria. Because they were hysterical. So they weren't any happier then than they are now. Please be honest. But again, because once you have a side and you need to stay on it, then obviously you have to negate everything else and exclude things that make your side null and void. Neither of us are happy. And even now when we're not happy, no one mentioned why we're not happy. It's just because we're not having kids. No, it's because inflation has gone up. No one mentioned COVID-19. No one mentioned wars that are going on all over the world. It's just like we have reason not to be happy. Depression rates are gone up because the world is burning dumpster fire. Not just because people aren't having kids. Please keep it real. Keep it a buck. There's so much going on why we're not happy right now. Look at what's going on with these deportations. Like, there's so many reasons why we're not happy. But feminists. Okay. You know what? Okay. If you want to oversimplify it, if you want to blame feminists, most feminists are used to being the scapegoat. So, like, it's not new to us. A lot of us grew up being this black sheep. People blamed us for everything. So it's not new. Like, you think you're doing anything new by blaming us for everything? Girl, I eat that for breakfast. People blame me for shit I don't even do. It's not new. It's just so tired. It's so tired. We need to blame somebody for someone. Blame, again, is a huge indicator of shame. When people are blaming, including myself, clock it, when I do it as well, call me out, it's usually because there's some shame in negotiating. It's easier to point fingers at other people than to sit down and be like, I'm really uncomfortable with people showing their bodies and I can't show my body. Maybe instead of being like, I might be insecure about my body, so I feel like I need to hide, and oh my God, you're making me feel really ashamed of not being able to do that. I don't have the same confidence as you. Rather than being like, I don't have the same confidence as you, we're like, oh, she's a hoe and she's devaluing herself. Okay. If that makes you sleep at night, okay. If you need to blame somebody else to feel better about your way of life, okay. But there are options. You don't have to blame everybody outside of you. You do not have to. People tell me all the time, she blamed, get over it, Well, you get over it respectfully as well too, right? Sometimes it's just hard for us to see people that are liberated and free when we're taught and raised not to be, especially as a Christian. That was a very hard thing for me to get over. Now I have a really hard time showing cleavage. I've got great tits for a 40-year-old. Yeah, they're saggy, but they're mine. If I wanted to show more, I could. But I tend not to because I was raised not to. But I can't project that modesty on somebody else. That's not right. That's not right. Who am I, God? Now you need to be modest because I'm modest? That's fucking that's not right. Do what you want with your body. I have no right to tell you. I'm gonna mind my own business. Second of all, it's not new. The sexual revolution, yeah, that might have been in the 60s, but people were shaking their tits from before. You think there was no sex workers before 1960? What are you talking about? There were sex workers and prostitutes, again, in the Bible. Sex work is one of the oldest works? Forms of labor? Sex work is one of the oldest forms of labor, but they make it sound, again, like it's a new school thing. That's propaganda. They're lying to you. So here, again, I asked Gemini AI to give me give me examples of sex workers who were sexualized in public before whenever they think it happened. Again, from this thing I was watching, Julius Caesar was apparently a hoe. She was defying her father. She was stressing that man out because she was more liberated than most people during the Roman times. In Italy and Rome. That was Julius Caesar during the Roman Empire. You want to blame the sexual liberation? Again, no. There were sex workers before that. Girls were shaking their ass in the 1920s, in the 1800s. Okay. So here's what don't listen to me. What do I know? What do I know? So again, I went to Gemini AI since you guys are all obsessed with AI. So ancient and pre-modern societies, the public visibility of sex workers was often complex, with different classes of sex workers holding varying social statuses and degrees of public presence. While the concept of sexual revolution, as we know it, is a modern phenomenon, there were many examples of sex workers who were visible and even integral to part of public life. So here are some examples of sex workers who were publicly sexual before 1960, including in the Bible, because I asked it. So ancient civilization, pre-biblical and Roman. In ancient Greek, there were women who were called courtesans, who were often educated and independent than who were more often educated and independent than respectable wives. They participated in public life, particularly in symposia, which is exclusive to male dinner parties, where they would entertain with conversation, music, and dancing. Famous courtesans like Aspasia of Miletus, the partner of Athenian statesman Pericles, were celebrated figures in their time. In ancient Rome, meretresses and public brothels. In ancient Rome, prostitution was legal and regulated. Brothels were common and often marked by red phallic paintings and lamps, henceforth the red light district, right? Marking their purpose clear to the public. High-class courtesans and actresses sometimes enjoyed a degree of fame and influence. The word prostitute itself comes from the Latin word prostituere, I don't know if I said that right, meaning to expose publicly, which referred to how these women were distinguished from others. So this is, again, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, not just the 1960s. Stop why you always lie? A half-truth is a whole lie. You can't just pick and choose what you want. The sexual revolution is not a new thing. It's a new modern phenomena. But girls were doing it back in the days too. Again, Maya Angelou, Josephine Baker, girls we respect. Well, you might not respect them. I hope those are queens in my book. Again, the Bible, Rahab of Jericho. Found in the book of Joshua, Rahab is a well-known example of a prostitute who played a significant role in biblical narrative. She was a brothel keeper in Jericho who hid 2 Israelite spies an act of faith that led to her and her family's salvation. Her profession was publicly known, and she was even included in the lineage of Jesus in the New Testament. The prostitute in the parables. So prostitutes were often referenced in the Bible to illustrate moral and social points. In the Gospels, Jesus says to the chief priests, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you." This is from Matthew 21, verse 31. The reference highlights their public status and social standing at the time. And we also have pre-modern and early modern societies, such as medieval Europe. There was licensed brothels. During the Middle Ages, prostitution was often tolerated and even regulated by city authorities. In places like London, the brothels in Southwark were famously owned by the Bishop of Winchester. Prostitutes were sometimes required to wear distinctive clothing to set them apart from respectable women. Finally, we have Victorian and the Gilded Age in America. Sporting women. So in the 19th and 20th centuries, large American cities often had red light districts where brothels flourished. While legally ambiguous, these areas were a visible part of the urban landscape. Some high-profile madams, like Polly Adler in New York City, gained a form of public notoriety. So again, I just wanted to share examples, that there are examples, even from ancient times, right? Again, this usually focuses on white culture. I'm sure you'll find sex workers again in Africa and in other parts of Asia and so on and so forth, right? It's not just a new phenomenon. It's not just like all of a sudden and after the 1960s, women started to devalue themselves. They've been doing this. Sex work is, again, as old as time. So I just wanted to raise that because those points were not brought up. And I thought that those were actually really key to the argument and the debates that were being had, right? I just saw today, I saw today that China has banned OnlyFans in China because of morality, and it's, same thing as what Candace Owens is saying. I want you to also remember that a lot of this has to do with taking power away from women, because women are also making a lot of money there. Some of that is human trafficking, right? Don't get me wrong. There are women who are on OnlyFans who don't always have bodily autonomy and agency over their own money. But there are women who are making bank and they didn't need to rely on anybody. So I want you to also think about that. It's also a form of power control, right? Because some women were actually making a lot of money on OnlyFans. And when you live in societies that are all about control, that's, especially controlling women, that's a threat. So just remember that, right? As much as they talk about morality, it's also because women were making a lot of money on there. So that's all I wanted to really get into. Is just like, don't forget that when people like hyping up the sexual liberation and feminists have made us devalue ourselves and look at these hoes and they're just shaking their booty and they have no self-respect. It's not new. It's not new. Nothing is right or wrong. It's just not new. It's not new. So, that's all. Until next time, in solidarity.